In the quiet stillness of a trance state, Edgar Cayce, often called the sleeping prophet, revealed extraordinary insights about Jesus Christ that challenged conventional religious understanding. Through thousands of documented readings, Cayce described in remarkable detail the lost years of Jesus, those unchronicled periods between Jesus' childhood and the beginning of his ministry at age 30. These revelations, drawn from what Cayce called the Akashic records, offered a profound alternative narrative that many religious institutions preferred to keep hidden from public view. Before we continue, drop a quick hi in the comments and let us know where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. Edgar Cayce never sought to undermine Christianity. Born into a devout Christian family in Kentucky in 1877, he maintained deep reverence for Jesus throughout his life. Yet in his trance states, Cayce accessed information that painted a more expansive picture of Jesus' journey, one that incorporated elements of Eastern philosophy, ancient Egyptian mysteries, and esoteric knowledge that mainstream Christianity had long suppressed. The entity, as Cayce often referred to Jesus in his readings, spent many years in travel and study. According to Cayce, after Jesus' appearance at the temple at age 12, the last biblical mention until his baptism, the young Jesus embarked on an extraordinary spiritual odyssey that would prepare him for his world-changing ministry. Cayce's readings describe Jesus traveling extensively throughout Egypt, India, Persia, and even Tibet. In Persia, he studied with the Magi, Cayce revealed in reading 57:49-8, learning their understanding of the coming Messiah and deepening his connection to universal consciousness. This period of study with the Zoroastrian priests allowed Jesus to integrate ancient wisdom into his developing spiritual framework. The journey continued eastward, where Jesus reportedly spent considerable time in India and Tibet. There, according to Cayce, he studied with Buddhist monks and Hindu mystics, mastering meditation techniques and exploring philosophical concepts that would later influence his teachings. Cayce described how Jesus became known as Isa during these years, a name still revered in certain Eastern traditions that maintain their own records of Jesus' visits. What makes Cayce's revelations particularly compelling is their consistency across thousands of separate readings conducted over decades. Without conscious knowledge of his previous statements, Cayce repeatedly described the same timeline and experiences for Jesus during these formative years. Detailed accounts emerged of Jesus studying ancient texts in Alexandria's Great Library, learning healing techniques from Egyptian mystery schools, and absorbing the wisdom of Eastern spiritual traditions. Perhaps most controversial were Cayce's assertions about Jesus' initiation into Egyptian mystery traditions. In Egypt, one reading stated, the entity learned the ancient methods of healing and transformation that had been preserved from Atlantean times. Cayce described Jesus undergoing initiation in the Great Pyramid, where he achieved a perfect fusion of physical and spiritual understanding, knowledge that would later enable his miraculous healings. These revelations directly challenge the Church's carefully controlled narrative. If Jesus had indeed studied with Eastern masters and Egyptian initiates, it would suggest that his teachings might incorporate wisdom from multiple spiritual traditions rather than representing a wholly unique divine revelation. This possibility threatened the exclusivity claimed by Christian institutions throughout history. Religious authorities have historically suppressed such alternative narratives. During the formative centuries of Christianity, numerous texts describing Jesus' travels and studies were systematically excluded from the canonical Bible. The Council of Nicaea in 325 CE and subsequent church councils carefully curated which writings would be considered sacred and which would be labeled heretical. Texts mentioning Jesus' Eastern journeys were among those deemed dangerous to Orthodox teaching. Cayce's readings suggested that Jesus consciously synthesized diverse spiritual traditions into a unified teaching appropriate for his time and culture. He took the truths from many lands, Cayce stated, and presented them in a form that his people could understand and accept. This portrayal of Jesus as a master synthesizer of global wisdom traditions, rather than solely a Jewish prophet or divine anomaly, has profound implications for interfaith understanding. The lost years also included, according to Cayce, intensive preparation in the Essene communities near the Dead Sea. The Essenes, a Jewish sect known for their ascetic lifestyle and ritual purification practices, allegedly recognized Jesus' unique spiritual nature from his birth. Cayce described Mary, Jesus' mother, as having been raised and educated in Essene temples, prepared specifically for her role in bringing the Messiah into the world. The Essenes, Cayce explained in reading 254-109, maintained the understanding that a soul of great universal awareness would incarnate to fulfill ancient prophecies. They created a nurturing environment for both Mary and Jesus, providing specialized education and spiritual training. Archaeological discoveries of the Dead Sea Scrolls decades after Cayce's readings have corroborated the existence and practices of Essene communities, lending credibility to aspects of his narrative. What emerges from Cayce's collective readings is an image of Jesus deliberately preparing himself through study, travel, and spiritual practice for his later ministry. Rather than simply waiting in obscurity until age 30, Jesus actively sought wisdom from the greatest spiritual traditions of his time. He mastered healing techniques, meditation practices, and philosophical systems that would inform his revolutionary teaching. This perspective transforms our understanding of Jesus' famous proclamation, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." Rather than a statement of exclusive religious authority, it becomes the culmination of a lifetime spent integrating diverse paths of truth. Jesus could make this claim authentically because he had personally explored and mastered multiple spiritual approaches. Cayce's readings also address the practical skills Jesus developed during these years. In addition to spiritual knowledge, Jesus reportedly learned languages, mathematics, and various healing modalities. He worked as a carpenter not only in Nazareth, but in Egypt and India as well, using this trade to support himself during his travels. This practical education complemented his spiritual development, creating a fully integrated human being. Particularly fascinating were Cayce's descriptions of Jesus' time in Kashmir and Tibet, where he allegedly studied ancient records of previous incarnations of divine consciousness into human form. According to Cayce, Jesus came to understand his place in a continuous tradition of spiritual avatars, enlightened beings who periodically incarnate to advance human consciousness. This perspective aligned with Eastern concepts of cyclical time rather than the linear historical view predominant in Western thought. The Church's decision to conceal these aspects of Jesus' life served specific theological and political purposes. By presenting Jesus as unique and disconnected from other spiritual traditions, Church authorities could claim exclusive access to divine truth. This exclusivity consolidated their power and justified the suppression of competing religious perspectives. The narrative of Jesus suddenly emerging as a fully formed spiritual teacher at his baptism created an unbridgeable gap between him and ordinary spiritual seekers. Cayce's revelations challenge this artificial separation. If Jesus developed his spiritual understanding through study and practice, it suggests that others might follow a similar path of development. The gulf between ordinary humanity and divine consciousness becomes a matter of degree rather than kind, a journey of awakening available to all rather than the exclusive province of a single individual. This democratization of spiritual potential aligns with Jesus' own teachings as recorded in the Gospels. "The things that I do, you shall do also, and greater things than these shall you do." If Jesus meant these words literally, it suggests he understood his role not as an unreachable exemplar, but as a way-shower demonstrating human spiritual potential. Of course, Cayce himself never claimed his readings were infallible. He often expressed surprise and occasional discomfort with information that emerged during his trance states, particularly when it challenged his own conscious religious beliefs. He urged people to test the readings against their own reason and spiritual insight rather than accepting them blindly as absolute truth. What makes Cayce's narrative of Jesus' lost years particularly compelling is how it resolves certain inconsistencies in the biblical account. The profound wisdom, healing abilities, and spiritual authority Jesus demonstrated at the beginning of his ministry become more comprehensible if they resulted from years of intensive study and practice. The mysterious gap in the biblical narrative finds purposeful content. The question naturally arises, if these accounts of Jesus' formative years are true, why wouldn't he have explicitly shared them during his teaching ministry? Cayce suggested that Jesus taught through methods appropriate to his audience and historical context. Speaking openly about studying with Buddhists or Egyptian initiates would have created immediate barriers to acceptance among his primarily Jewish audience. Instead, Jesus translated universal principles into language and cultural forms his listeners could comprehend. The Master, as Cayce often called Jesus, did not come to destroy but to fulfill. This fulfillment, according to Cayce, meant demonstrating the highest expression of spiritual laws and principles preserved in diverse traditions throughout the world. Jesus didn't reject the wisdom of other cultures. He incorporated their essential truths while expressing them through his own cultural framework. Throughout his readings, Cayce emphasized that the purpose of revealing these lost years wasn't to diminish Jesus' spiritual significance, but to make his example more accessible and applicable to ordinary seekers. Understanding Jesus as someone who consciously developed his spiritual capacities inspires others to pursue their own development rather than settling for passive worship of an incomprehensible divine anomaly. The implications of Cayce's revelations extend beyond theological curiosity. They suggest potential bridges between Eastern and Western spiritual traditions, revealing common ground that transcends doctrinal differences. If Jesus himself studied and respected diverse paths to truth, perhaps his followers might do likewise, recognizing wisdom wherever it appears, rather than limiting it to particular religious frameworks. For those who discover these alternative narratives of Jesus' development, a profound shift in perspective often occurs. Jesus transforms from a distant divine figure to an elder brother on the spiritual path, someone who has traveled the journey of awakening and left clear footprints for others to follow. His teachings take on new dimensions when understood as the distillation of both divine inspiration and comprehensive human spiritual exploration. The forbidden nature of these revelations speaks to the threatening power they hold for established religious authorities. By reclaiming these lost years, spiritual seekers reclaim their own potential for direct spiritual experience beyond institutional mediation. If Jesus developed his consciousness through disciplined practice and study, similar development becomes possible for all who follow a dedicated spiritual path. Cayce's account of Jesus' lost years ultimately presents a more universal Christ, one whose message transcends the boundaries of any single religion or cultural tradition. This expanded vision of Jesus aligns with his own most radical teachings about the kingdom of heaven being within and the direct accessibility of divine consciousness to all sincere seekers. It transforms religious practice from rule-following to conscious spiritual development. The mystery of Jesus' lost years continues to intrigue spiritual seekers across religious boundaries. Cayce's detailed descriptions, delivered consistently over thousands of readings, provide one of the most comprehensive alternative narratives available. Whether one accepts these accounts literally or metaphorically, they invite deeper reflection on the universal spiritual journey that transcends specific religious forms. Through his remarkable psychic abilities, Edgar Cayce pulled back the veil on aspects of Jesus' life that conventional religious institutions had long obscured. His revelations suggest a Jesus who actively sought wisdom from diverse sources, integrated multiple spiritual traditions, and consciously developed his divine potential through disciplined practice. This portrayal challenges narrower sectarian views while honoring the profound spiritual mastery Jesus ultimately embodied. For those willing to consider these alternative narratives, a more accessible and universal understanding of Jesus' message emerges, one that emphasizes the awakening of divine consciousness within each individual rather than blind adherence to religious dogma. This living spirituality, based on direct experience rather than secondhand belief, may represent the true forbidden knowledge that religious institutions have most feared. As we contemplate Cayce's revelations about Jesus' journey of spiritual development, we might ask ourselves, what would it mean to follow not just Jesus' teachings, but his example of conscious spiritual growth? How might our approach to religion change if we understood Jesus as someone who actively sought wisdom from diverse sources, rather than receiving it passively through divine dispensation? The answers to these questions have the power to transform not only individual spiritual practice, but collective religious understanding. By reclaiming the lost years of Jesus' development, we reclaim our own potential for spiritual awakening and conscious evolution, the very awakening that Jesus himself sought to inspire in his followers. Perhaps the most profound truth revealed through Cayce's readings is that the divine consciousness, exemplified by Jesus, remains accessible to all who sincerely seek it. The path may demand dedication, study, and practice, just as Jesus' own development required, but it remains open to any soul drawn to walk it. This democratization of spiritual potential may be the most revolutionary aspect of Cayce's revelations about the lost years of Jesus. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of Edgar Cayce's revelations about Jesus' lost years. If these insights resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. Your engagement helps us share these profound spiritual perspectives with more seekers worldwide. Hit that like button to support our channel and subscribe so you don't miss our upcoming explorations of hidden spiritual wisdom. Remember, as Cayce himself might say, the greatest mystery is not what lies beyond, but what lies within.